mentioned before, this tends to be a little bit of a sensitive subject for some people. And what I want to encourage you is that you don't have to look at this in terms of this is what I need to start doing right now, okay? You don't have to look at that in those terms. You can just diagnose and understand what has been happening in your life and how you've interacted in those roles, okay? And that's really the purpose of this chapter. If you look at this and you start to recognize, well, whoa, my experience was really different than this, okay? And you go, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, and this is what he's supposed to do, now what, okay? You'll get overwhelmed, and you'll even potentially get discouraged. And so the purpose of this is not to do that, but it's to put an overlay of truth above everything else, okay? And to start seeing and to assess our lives and our experiences through the filter and the perspective of God. And that's really what we want to do in every chapter, okay, is we want to get the heart of God. We want to understand what he's after in our lives. Now, I want to also tell you something, just to encourage you, that even if you read this and understand this and run out of the room and go, I'm going to do it, you're going to fail. Okay, now that's not a lot of encouragement, is it? Okay, here's the encouraging piece. This is how God works. Okay, God works to not ask us to live up to a standard that he imposes on us. Instead, he seeks to surgically deal with our heart and to remove all the obstacles that prevent us from being who he created us to be. And you know what? That is pretty effortless if we're willing to submit to him. And that's really what we're going to be doing over the course of the next 11, 12 weeks, is we're going to lay down on the surgical table of the great physician in our life, and we're going to say, go ahead and deal with me. If you're willing to do that, let me tell you what, God will change your life. A lot of times the fear that we have of what we're going to find in that process, what he's going to diagnose, is so tremendous that we're like, that's it, I can't handle anymore. And then we start to feel the pain, because you know what, knives hurt. If you go into surgery and you hopefully get put out, right? It doesn't quite work that way spiritually. We have to stay conscious. But when that knife actually cuts into you to remove something, let's say it's cancer, that initial, it's going to cut, that's going to hurt. And when God does a spiritual surgery in our lives, we can expect there to be a level of pain. In fact, I would say if there's not, that the surgery probably hasn't happened yet. Okay? The encouragement that I can give you is to not sweat it right now. Don't sweat it. Just let God do the work he needs to do. Let him expose what he needs to do. And he has a way, in all his power, in all the almightiness of who he is, to just gradually begin to remove the things that hinder and block us, just by exposing who he is and exposing the things in us that aren't quite what he intended them to be. So let's look at the family, because I really want to give you a snapshot. And this is based on chapter 2, and some of you may have read it and some of you may have not. But I want to give you a snapshot of that chapter right now. And really what we're going to deal with is the heart of God in his design. And we're going to put him into the family system as he intended it to be. Because the heart of God is expressed through the family. It shows his character and action as a parent and spouse, and is meant to teach us God's very nature and the depth of his love for us. Okay, that's why we have family on earth. Families on earth are a portrayal of who God is and how he intended to operate in creating the human race. It's beautiful, really. It's a beautiful picture of who God is. Male and female, husband and wife, represent both aspects of God's character. God is a father and a mother. He's a husband and a wife. Okay, I know that might seem weird, but he has both those characteristics. And so when when we look at the marriage relationships, that relationship actually highlights two different sets of God's character. Okay? On earth, the purpose of family was designed to provide a safe haven where love, security, and safety allow for healthy physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual growth of each member, but especially the children, okay? So everyone's meant to grow in the family, but children, that's the whole purpose of children, is that when they're in that family system, they're there to grow. They're there to be nurtured. They're there to learn how to live life without parents someday. The family is a training and preparation field for the battlefield of life, and it is a battlefield, huh? It's a battlefield. Children use the home above any outside influence. There are other influences, but outside of any other influence, they use the family to deal with emotions, to learn relationships, and to learn how to love. Okay, we can't negate that. We can try to turn our backs on the things that happen in our family of origin. We can say it's in the past. We can say I'm a new creation in Christ Jesus. Old has passed away. Behold, all things have become new. But we cannot minimize and negate the fact that we were influenced in that family of origin. It's going to affect us. It just is, because it's so powerful. It's like, I think I put in the beginning of chapter 2, it's like a marinating process. That chicken, you have it hanging out in that teriyaki sauce for a couple hours. What's the purpose of that? It's so it gets saturated. And that's really what it's like in our family system. We get saturated by what's ever going on in that system. And whether we like the flavor or we don't like the flavor, it's going to influence and affect us nonetheless. Learning from the first family. Okay, marriage is a divinely appointed institution that came from an acknowledgement that man needed companionship. Okay, it wasn't good for Adam to be alone. And so God created the family to deal with what he perceived, what he created, really, not even perceived. He created to be the need in Adam's life. Okay, so it's not wrong, it's not bad, nothing like that. It's a divine institution. The marriage relationship, however, was desperately shaken through the fall. I blame everything on Adam and Eve. Is that fair? Actually, we got to blame that little serpent, though. That's really who the real problem is. But once that took place, okay, that relationship lacked the resources. I think I talked about this last week a little bit, to make that relationship could no longer work as God intended, because it didn't have the resources that God intended it would have. Okay? What happened was that both marriage partners broke down in their roles. Okay? Eve believed what Satan said over what God said, which in essence put Satan in authority over her. And Adam believed what his wife said over God, giving her authority over God. This deception continues to be a problem. It's an authority problem. Just take some time to meditate on this, really, because it's really a huge principle, is that's what took place in the garden. It's not just that Eve bit an apple. It's that she believed Satan over God's truth. He became her voice of authority. And once she did that, she was now underneath him, underneath Satan. Okay? Huge, huge. And what did Adam do? Adam, as the designated leader, the God-ordained designated leader in that family, listened to his wife over what God spoke as true. And he also disrupted the authority in that situation, okay? And that is really the tragedy. That's what took place in that situation. And I can't go into it in detail right now, but that authority is brought back when Jesus Christ is put into the equation. Okay, and he has the potential to realign it. Now, you might say, well, you don't know my husband. We have all women in here, so those that are going to be watching on DVD, bear with us, because we definitely teach this material to males and females, and it is an authority issue, and that can be repaired, and that can be reconstructed based on the redemptive principles of God. And that's just a little sneak preview. What was this original curse about? Well, Adam was asked to provide for his family at the price of his labor. He would need love to do this. Love. Men need love to do this job. It's a huge job. And we bear a huge responsibility. Whatever that was in that culture is different than what it looks like in this culture. And sometimes I think we get lost in the Bible because we don't understand that God was talking in the culture of that time, and we don't need to change truth at all, but we need to understand, what does that look like for a guy living in this culture? Okay, well, we have, the whole career world out there, all the different things going on. But that basically men bear the weight of responsibility for the family, period. Okay? And actually, you want to know what? That's actually a curse. That's actually a curse. That was actually his curse, to have to care for us and take care of us. What was Eve given? She was given the pain of labor and childbirth. Even more difficult, she would desire the love of her husband, but be required to submit to his authority. Which is worse? Childbirth, labor, submit to... Have you been through both? Okay. Okay. Probably the second, I would guess. Okay. Probably the second. Because women have this inherent need to be loved by the man in their life. And that's legitimate. It's perfectly legitimate. It's actually given to us. But the problem is that that's not always going to go the way we want it to go or the way we hope it would go. And not only that, but we're required to be under him at some level. And I don't mean under in a positional way. I don't mean he's above us like he's better than us, but in an authority way, because that's just the order of God. And I know I had a real problem with this one, okay, believe me. So I know I understand and identify with the people that struggle with that, but that's just the way that God created it to be, okay? Most all problems, I would challenge you to think about that, can be traced back to this, okay? God provided a pathway of redemption through the person of Jesus Christ. He could offer the resources to make that relationship function as God intended. He can do it. We're not even close to getting there yet. In fact, I don't know if this will discourage you or encourage you, but the relationship section of this workshop is actually a different workbook. Okay, this first process we're going through is just to understand who God is and how he functions in our life. But we're working through right now a second process where we're looking intensively at our relationship issues, and which is great, but it's like a deeper layer. We're not going to go there yet because it would be too much. We're going to systematically start looking at what's going on in our own lives and in our own hearts and what we've been exposed to. So hold on to your hats, okay? The healthy family system, what does it look like? What did God mean for it to be? Jesus Christ is at the foundation. Has to be. It's grace-based. If anyone isn't familiar with grace, I'm going to be referring to it quite a bit. Okay? A lot of times we think grace is unmerited favor. But grace is more than that. It's actually filtering something through the perspective of Jesus instead of the perspective of what's wrong. So when we look at something, when we look at the sin in our lives, we can go, oh, that's so terrible. Oh, that's so bad. I can't believe I did it. Or we can say, God's grace is sufficient, okay, because he has the remedy for that. And so it's a different perspective. It's not just a matter of whether or not we have divine favor from God. It's a matter of how we see life. If we see life as a bunch of negatives and a bunch of critical things, we're living on that's not grace, okay? That's actually something else. It's called shame, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about shame throughout this process. Unconditional love. The heart will be emphasized more than behaviors. We aren't just products of what we do. What we do and who we are two separate things. And that was a foreign concept to me in the beginning. It's like, what? I thought I was what I did, but we're not, okay? Roles and responsibilities will be clearly defined and understood. Boundaries will be clearly stated that define what is and what is not acceptable. Communication is real, open, and honest, where all family members are allowed to express real feelings and share the challenges of life. And there's consistency. Consistency means it's not over here one day and over here the next. It's just the same. Okay, that's what God designed. That's what he had in mind. Okay, that's the architect of our life. That's what he designed when he built this institute of family. As a result of being in a family, we can find security, peace, and joy. The family has a desire to submit to one another. Submission is not a problem whatsoever when the person you're submitting to loves you. And that's actually why the biggest task we have right now is to learn how to submit to the Lord in our heart, because he loves us so much. It's going to be, once we understand his love for us, it's a piece of cake. I know that's like the big S word. The big S word is submit. But when it's truly working as it's intended, submission is a joy to do. The home has a spirit of freedom that allows everyone the opportunity to succeed and fail. Okay? Our failures are as much of building blocks in our life as our successes are. Healthy boundaries offer the ability to know how to set personal guidelines and recognize the value of submitting to all rules and regulations. If we're exposed to healthy boundaries, we're going to be able to live them out in our life. Just the same if we're not exposed to them, we're not going to be able to live them out in our lives. Healthy self-esteem and identity is formed where children are able to find their unique personalities, gifts, and identities and learn the value of who they are in God's design. Okay? The maturity process is nurtured and healthy growth takes place spiritually and emotionally as well as physically. All right, that is what God intended. That's our Maker's heart. What happens? What happens? How does this thing break down? Well, first of all, let's say every family is broken down in some way because nobody's living perfectly, okay? So depending on what broke down in your own life, you can be assured that, we use the term dysfunctional family, but really we're all dysfunctional people and we all have dysfunctional families, okay? That's why we need God so much. But because the family is meant to be a representation of how God loves us, when it's damaged, it can cut right at the heart and the core of our perceptions of who He is. And at this point in the game, that's really what we're after right now. How we've learned to evaluate and believe who our God is and what He can do in our lives. Because when we have negative earthly parents and negative earthly experience, we automatically transfer that onto who God is. What kind of God would do this? I can't tell you as a counselor how many times I've heard that. How many times I've heard that. When the family breaks down, it's as real as an actual physical home losing its foundation, structure, and support. We're going to be looking at how God designed the marriage to be. We're going to look at it as a picture of an actual physical home. But I just want you to picture a house that was demolished and was laying in pieces, and it had no foundation, was ripped. It went through a tornado, it went through a storm, whatever the case might be. You would say that would be, you couldn't live there. You couldn't live there, right? That's not even a home anymore. And yet at a spiritual and emotional level, that's happening in so many of our lives. And the home is no longer a home, and it's no longer a place where we can go and where we can find the safety and the security that a home is meant to bring. There's the physical and there's the spiritual in life. And you know what? God is an awesome teacher when we start to listen to Him. He will teach us principles in the physical realm that are actually His principles that apply to us spiritually. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll continue to reiterate that as we go along. The purpose of family can be so skewed, it has the opposite effect. And it becomes a place of fear rather than safety. This is tragic, but it happens all the time. In fact, our culture is breaking down because the family system is breaking down. Okay? It's at the heart of every single thing that we see happening in this world right now. And it makes sense because if it reflects God's heart and this breaks down, what is that really doing? It's really sabotaging who God is, first and foremost. The dysfunctional family is driven by selfish needs of family members where a person dictates the overall operation. Love is conditional. When love is conditional, it's based on performance, where children quickly recognize that what they do matters more than who they are. And there's a good chance that a majority of us can relate to that. Actually, you know what, as a society, in this culture that we live in, that's pretty much the standard. We're pretty much taught that to be the truth. The house is covered by guilt, shame, and fear. I'll tell you what, those are the telltale signs that there's a lot of conflict and spiritual problems going on in a home if it has guilt, shame, and fear at the root of it, okay? The roles are undefined and chaotic. We'll discuss this more in detail. Proper boundaries have not been established. A lack of consequence and or discipline can encourage or enable bad behavior. There's emotional dishonesty in this home as well, and that means people are usually playing a charade. They're not being real. Everything's kind of a game, and we're just kind of pretending to act this way and to respond this way. Okay, complete breakdown. This is completely the opposite of what God intended for the family system to be. What does the family system produce? A sense of shame, insecurity, fear, and anger. The family members need to rebel or to overly compensate to hold things together. I say that would be the formation of the addict-type personality that we talked about last week or the codependent-type personality. One checks out. One says, I'm not dealing with this. I'm out of here, man. The other says, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix it. If I try harder, I can hold it together. Okay, and you see those two. And you know what's really interesting? The addict and the codependent aren't so far apart at all. They just learn to act out in different ways. In fact, they are derived from the same family system. Okay? Poor personal boundaries, lack of control, powerlessness, and a sense of feeling trapped, poor self-esteem and identity, it just goes on and on. I mean, we could just come up with a huge long list. Emotional and spiritual immaturity, inability to have relationships. Listen to me. It reproduces itself. okay? It reproduces itself. And it's not, it might not be fair, it might not be pretty, we might not like it, but it just does. That's just what it does. If that's what we've been exposed to, that's in our marinating process, at some level, we carry that into our adulthood until we allow God to deal with that that's in us. And we may have had intervention early in our lives. We may have someone loved us early in our lives, and we may not. We may not have, and now we need to learn. And God is above it all. And without understanding that God designed the family system, and He's spiritually our family, and He's spiritually our Father, if we didn't have that hope, that's why I couldn't even imagine trying to teach codependency without that hope. There is no hope. There is no hope. Because we have the ability to be put back together as God intended us to be, despite what the people out there do. And it might not seem like it right now, but as God is my witness in my life and in the lives of hundreds of people I've worked with and we've seen, He absolutely can. He is a restorer. He is a redeemer. That's why we need Him. Okay? That's why we need Him. Okay, we're going to look at the family roles. This is the nitty-gritty, okay? The family roles. And I just want to point out 4 of the main characters within the family system. The first is Jesus. He's either present or absent in that family. And He is the foundation. He is the foundation. Okay? The cement gets laid in the foundation of a house upon which the home will be built. That's His job. The husband is the infrastructure, including walls and ceiling. He is the covering. He is all the walls and the ceiling, okay, which basically, that's a lot, huh? That's a lot. The wife is the pillar or the supportive beams in the house. And the children are interns learning in that environment how to live life, okay? That's basically the 4 components of what's going on in a family system. Let's look at that. The foundation of Jesus Christ. The entire purpose of marriage is to portray the way Christ loves the church. Without Him, marriage doesn't even have a purpose or foundation. Marriage doesn't even make sense. And that's why our culture has rejected marriage, because it doesn't make sense. 2 broken people, 2 sin-based broken people that do not understand spiritually the purpose of marriage are going to have a really difficult time. Even people that do, as Christians, have a difficult time, okay? With Jesus at the center, the husband and wife love each other through Him and for Him. He provides all necessary resources. He offers the remedy for the curse. He brings redemption through His love and grace being poured into each spouse, who can in turn pour into each other. That's really the whole purpose of marriage, is to learn how to receive from God, to give away. Receive from Him, to give away. Their intimacy produces life, just as our intimacy with Jesus Christ produces spiritual life. That's pretty deep. Chew on that one for a minute. But that is really all the functions of marriage, including emotional intimacy, physical intimacy, spiritual intimacy, are a picture of how Jesus loves us. Okay? Now, when that gets really tweaked, what does that do? Messes up the whole picture, breaks something that's beautiful and sabotages it and makes it something that's not beautiful at all. Let's look at that. Let's pick on the men for a minute here, but don't worry, our time is coming. So, guys on DVD, our time is coming here. The husband-father, the male father-husband figure represents the structure of the home itself and is the entire covering. That's what we just talked about. Okay? It is the infrastructure. And without infrastructure, you don't have a house. His responsibilities are that he is the CEO and the leader of the house. He has the God-given position of authority, not because he chose that, but because God chose that on his behalf. He was designated with that role, okay? It doesn't even mean he fits the role, okay? But God gave him that role. He's called to use love, not control. In fact, it's interesting if we look at Ephesians 5, if you jot that down and read that when you have a chance. I think it's also in the book as well. It's really interesting to see that the number one thing that the husband is called to do is to love. Not the wife, the husband. He's called to love. And that's the number one way, as we're going to learn that role breaks down, is that he doesn't love. He's given the responsibility of the provider and the protector, the infrastructure. It's pretty all-inclusive. He's got a big job. He's got a big, big, big job. What does he need in his role? He needs the respect of his position of authority and decision-making. I have never met a man ever, ever, ever in my life that will not affirm that. Ever. Okay? And when you get through a point of, and you can't do it initially, if you have a difficult dynamic in your relationship, there's a whole process sometimes that needs to be worked through. But when we can get to that place of learning to do that, it can be a really powerful thing. He needs the affirmation, support, and encouragement of his wife. He needs the structure and female touch in his house. A man is designed to need a beautifier to a degree. I know we can have a little bit of switched roles in that regard, and that's okay. The beauty and sexuality of his wife, okay? What I want you to understand, you might say, well, that's a little bit different or whatever. These are basic, inherent needs, and they're okay. They're okay. There's nothing wrong with them, okay? What is wrong with them is when they get broken down, okay? And sometimes all we see is the breaking down, and we don't have any hope because it's broken down. We don't have any hope. It's like, well, how do I work with that, okay? And we can't. We need a redeemer who's going to intervene in the situation. So what happens to the husband father when his role breaks down? Well, a lot of really difficult dynamics can occur. And these are just a few of them. Instead of focusing on loving his wife, he's on the receiving end of her love towards him. It happens all the time. Woman takes over the job to love. Instead of protecting, he controls his family in a dictator fashion when he threatens or abuses them. Happens all the time. He uses his power. He uses his authority to hurt, to harm the family members. This is a deep, deep distortion of the heart of God because God has all power in the universe. And what does he do with that? He loves us. He cares for us. He protects us. Instead of leading, he thwarts his responsibility or allows his wife to be in control. Okay? Guys, we live in a culture right now, and I know there's men. God is building up a generation of men that do want to take that responsibility. We just had an awesome movie come out, Courageous, that really reflected that. But guys, one of the ways they break down is they just drop that. They just drop the ball. Or they even allow their wife to be in control. And we might like that. We might be like, that's cool. I hear women bragging about how I was going to a mom's group once upon a time, and they're all bragging about how they were, in charge. And I'm thinking, man, oh man, you don't know what you're saying. That's not a good thing to brag about. Okay? It might seem good for a minute, but it's a fundamentally broken system when that's occurring. We'll always want to do that too, women. We will. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Instead of being a provider, he looks for his wife or someone else to provide for him. I just want to say, especially in this economic downturn, there are times and places for that as a family when one is going to offset the other. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's the overall burden and sense of responsibility. That's what I'm talking about, okay? Instead of being sexually faithful to his wife, he engages in relationships outside of the marriage, one of the most grotesque and awful ways of disrupting that role because it's based on a holy and pure covenant. Instead of being steadfast and stable infrastructure, he neglects and abandons the need of his family. Besides sexual unfaithfulness, the next thing is a man leaving is the most destructive force, I believe, known to both the family and to society as a whole. Most destructive thing in all the world that can happen. We're not here to point fingers because you know what? We're going to look at ourselves right now, okay? For one. But for two, there are reasons why this happens. There's reasons why this happens. And men, if we have men in our life that aren't living this role, the first and foremost thing that we need to do is start praying for them. Okay? We can't fix them, we can't change them, we can't tell them, here's a list for you, honey. Now start doing it. Okay? It won't work. It will make it worse. It won't make it better. Okay? And I know we want to. I know that that's the tendency, but it won't help. It's a condition of our hearts when our role breaks down. And if we see the role breaking down in someone like a spouse, it's a condition of their heart, and they need for God to deal with them. Okay? The wife mom, let's look at her role. Okay? The position of a wife is critical in holding the home together. She maintains the overall structure of the home by standing firm in her supportive aspects. Okay, I just want to point out to you that a woman's role, being supportive, is a strong role. She is a strong support in that family. It is not a weak role. Okay? Without her support, those beams come down. What happens? Everything caves in. The walls work great. The roof is great. But the support is what's necessary to maintain it. There is not one role that supersedes the other. They are mutually important. If visualized, she can be seen as a decorative pillar that both supports the home's infrastructure while offering a beautifying element. The meaning of supportive, we could interpret it to mean the strength behind the overall system. Proverbs 14:1 says, a wise woman builds her home, but a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands. Okay, women, you are influential. You are influential, okay? Very, very important job, and there is no need to take on the stereotype that our culture has tried to formulate, and it's a lie from the pits of hell. I'll tell you why it's a lie, because she is so important that when she leaves her role, the whole family and the children are profoundly and deeply affected. Profoundly. And we actually have a whole generation of this. I'm not advocating that we can't have jobs. I'm not saying that, okay? I'm not saying that. But that our base was meant to kind of be the glue that keeps those things happening in the home, especially when it comes to parenting. Her responsibility, she's required to be submitted and respectful. This is where, like, having fruit or something in your hands would be bad. Okay, don't throw anything at me. She doesn't need to submit to wrongful behaviors of a spouse, just to the position itself. She is a supporter and encourager. She's a beautifier. She is called to nurture. We could go on and on and on. These are just a few things, okay? This isn't a complete list, okay? It's just to give you a glimpse, an idea. What are her needs? Well, she needs to be given loving leadership. A woman thrives. I have never met a woman in all her anger and all the dysfunction she's been exposed to, and all the pain and all the hurt, that doesn't actually want a man who will stand up and do his job. I have never met one, and I've worked with hundreds of them. I've never met one once that hasn't said, well, what if he did what he was called to do? I would want that. Oh, yeah, I would want that. Okay? Because it's inbred in us. We do want it. She needs to be shown affection and find acceptance, approval, and love by her father, husband. She thrives under affirmation that he cares and appreciates her. Women, we were born with a need to be loved by a male figure in our lives. Our daddies when we're little, our husbands when we're grown. And it's legitimate, and it was put in us by the heart of God, and we do not need to feel guilty or feel like there's something wrong with us that we would want that. God gave that to us. It's supposed to be there. She needs to be provided for and protected. She thrives when she feels secure and taken care of. This is where I see a lot of women, especially in codependency, they go, I don't want any, there's different levels that we go through in this. There's the woman that says, I don't want to be taken care of by a man ever again. Okay, thank you very much. Done that, tried that, not going back there again. But that's because they're speaking out of the woundedness, not the freedom. Okay, we were born with the desire to be taken care of, and there's nothing wrong with it. Nothing. It's something that actually reflects how we're supposed to mimic that relationship with Christ, where he's taking care of us, and he's being our spouse. She attempts to be the provider and protector of the house in place of her husband. I'll tell you what, when this happens, she's actually taking his role. She's actually in a masculine role when she's doing that. Okay? She assumes a position of authority and leadership over her husband, same thing. She's taking a male role when she does that. She is prone to manipulate a man to get him to love her and get him to provide for her the things she desires. We just kind of have a way of, I don't know what it is, but in our brokenness, we can do that, okay? And we can be very good at it, too. And it's one of the methods that we use to illegitimately try to get our needs met. And it's because, for some reason, when they're not getting met in the proper way, we try to come up with kind of plan B, okay? She fails to be nurturing of the emotional needs of the family. She neglects or defies the home and doesn't care about its overall sense of order and beauty. A chaotic home will hurt the entire family. Probably not as important as some of the other pieces, but it's important. She uses her own beauty and her sexuality to attract or draw the attention of other men. Okay, hopefully you get the point. Masculine versus feminine roles. Let's just look at this. Because here's the deal. For the most part, overall, the man is in a give-based role and the woman is meant to be in a receive-based role. Okay? Pretty much. We're both giving and we're both receiving in some levels as well. But when a man presumably allows a woman in that position, he's basically taking on the feminine role and she's taking on the masculine role. Do you get me? It's a role reversal situation. You hear that? Role reversal. That's what role reversal is. We're switching positions. And we live in a culture that says it doesn't matter. Who cares? Who cares? Just do whatever makes you happy. Except that when God designed something to work a certain way, when it works in a different way, it's going to get different results. Okay? Because it just is. Because He's the creator and that's how He made it. Okay, woman is in a receive-based role. When she tries to take over, control, or lead, she's in a masculine position. Many times a woman does the masculine position because he's unavailable, and it becomes a method, a means of survival. That is really surviving to significance. That's why, that's what happens. Okay, and if I don't take it over, who's going to do it? Who's going to do it? Okay, and I hear that. Believe me, I hear that. But it can radically alter her sense of identity and the type of man she will draw into her life. This is where we get really broken, because when people have sabotaged that role, we will learn to come up with this other survival role, and it will sabotage our identity, and it will sabotage how we interact and deal in future relationships as well. A man who doesn't take on a masculine position will lack healthy sense of self. He can't ever be fulfilled when he neglects this role. It is his primary purpose in life. I've never met a man that doesn't apply to. Okay? There is such amazing astonishment and joy in seeing a man who has been irresponsible in his position get it and stand up to the plate. It is one of the most beautiful, beautiful things out there that you can witness. And thank God we get to see that a lot. I'll tell you what happens, though, in the dysfunctional family system. When he does that, if the wife isn't healthy and she's used to being in that masculine position, do you think she likes it? No. We do a family workshop for people in our treatment program, and so if the husband's in the program and the wife has been in that caretaking role and she's been the leader and she's been doing this and doing that, he gets healthy. He's like, I am ready to step up to the plate. I want to be the man that God called me to be. I want to be the man that... Does she like it? She doesn't want anything to do with it. First of all, she doesn't trust him, and that kind of makes sense. She doesn't really have to trust him immediately. But second of all, it's really a control thing and it's an authority thing. It's like, I don't really want to give over those reins. And you did it wrong. You had your chance and you didn't do it right. Okay? So it's really difficult, and it's something that we have to work through with our family members, because sometimes it's what sabotages the ability for a family to ever become healthy and whole again. And it could be the other way. It doesn't just have to be, the woman not wanting to do it. It can be the woman gets healthy and the man doesn't want to do it, okay? It could be either way. I just want to talk to you real briefly about gender identity, because I really believe that this is something that we need to understand. I believe that one of the things that God is going to call us into in our recovery is He's going to help us to see who we are in Christ, but He's going to help us to connect with our female and our role males as well. This is such a core identity issue that I believe that if we don't have this take place in our life, that we really aren't going to be able to live free and to live in this world as God intended and designed us to be. Because it really is a core identity issue. And we need to see our role biblically so we can agree that God's design in our life, knowing He offers some flexibility, but truly intends for different purposes for the man and in the family. You can't blend these and mesh these together and say it doesn't matter. It does matter. It does. If distorted, we can relearn our role in terms of our relationship with Jesus Christ. Men learn to love the way Jesus loves. Women learn to submit to husband as if he is Jesus, motivated by the love they find in Christ. Okay, that's really where our freedom's going to come. It might not make too much sense right now, and you might not even like that, but we're going to move there. Okay, it doesn't have to happen. It's not going to happen right now necessarily. It might. I mean, I don't know. God can do anything, right? But probably it won't happen immediately. Okay. If modeled wrongly, we need to grieve and accurately see where we receive faulty messages about our identity in order to remove strongholds we might have. The entire purpose of this workshop is to remove strongholds in our life. You know what's amazing? When strongholds, and we're going to be spending a lot of time next week talking about strongholds, when strongholds get removed, it's like impurities that you would have in water. And you start off with a big, brown, murky glass of water, and you're like, ew, I'm not drinking that. And then one by one, a filtration process takes place and a purification process takes place. And lo and behold, eventually that water becomes something that's nourishing and something that we can actually take. And that's really what God wants to do in our lives. He wants to purify our lives. Okay? He wants to make us holy. It might be a scary word for some of you, but that's what purifying is. He wants to make us holy. And so it's not in what we do that makes us that way, what we do out here. It's what he's doing in our hearts. And so everything we're going to sift and go through in this journey is going to take some level of that, whatever was sabotaged, and hopefully remove it. And the end result of that is the purification. Sometimes we think the purification is, I got to change this and this and this. I need to go home and be this and do that. That's called legalism. Who likes that word? Ew. But you know what? We don't even mean it. We think we're doing the right thing in thinking that that's what God wants. And I just want to encourage you tonight that that's not what God wants. He wants to deal with your heart. He wants you to learn to engage with him in a love-based, grace-based manner. He does not want you just to run out there and try to do everything. You weren't made to do that. You can't do that. Only he can do it in you, okay? Children of dysfunctional families, well, we may be products of that. What happens? We learn unhealthy belief systems about gender roles and the purpose of family. We adapt roles in order to survive. That can come in all different forms, all different shapes. We identify with the same rule we took on as children in our adult roles. And the reason why you did the homework you did in chapter 2 was to help you to see and understand that modeling that you had with mom and dad, how did that affect how the way you engaged and interacted with a husband or a wife? That's really what the purpose of it was. You can't be totally right or wrong on these answers. They're part of that purification process of God sifting and bringing to surface anything that might not be. And he doesn't do it to shame you and go, oh, look at how bad that is, okay? If you hear that, that's not the Lord talking to you, okay? The family in recovery. The family recovers when each family member deals with self. The family recovers as it can be aligned with God's principles and his intent and purpose for the family, including individual roles and responsibility. Just because we become healthy doesn't guarantee other family members will change. It becomes an us issue, but every single part of us has a different player in it. And every single part of us is going to have to deal with their issues individually. And so if you get a whole bunch of change and you're like praising God and you're like, yes, I got this now, why isn't he changing? I'll give him the book, okay? And then we hope that's going to work, and that doesn't work, okay? Trust me, it doesn't work. If he asks for the book, that's okay, but if you give him the book, it won't work, okay? We must learn to rely on prayer to usher in all change. We can hold steadfast in the reality that we are members of God's family. We often find our restoration and healing by learning how to love in the family of God. This is a community where you can learn how to authentically love, hopefully. You can learn that in this environment, and that's why recovery is so awesome. It gives us the opportunity to safely learn to interject these principles because we might have to go into a family system that doesn't operate under them. A healthy church and or recovery group can be the very place where we can begin to learn those healthy relational skills. So we're going to leave it at that for today. I'm going to pray out here in a minute. What I want to encourage you to do is, if you haven't done chapter 2, is to go through that, especially the application project where you're looking at your father and your mother in their roles and how you correspondingly acted out in those roles in later life. You can do it with an ex-spouse or a current spouse. You can do it with a boyfriend if you weren't married. You want to see basically how you've learned to play out the role in your life. And for us women, it's going to be the role of a wife or as a mother. And for men, obviously, and that would be listening to this at a later time, it's going to be their role as a father and as a husband to see how that correlates. So let's just go ahead and close out in prayer.
Hungry, I come to you, for I know you satisfy. I am